Be lifted high, be lifted high.
Hey, Shiloh family, midweek refuel. We're going to finish Acts chapter 19 tonight and just more exciting stuff that we're going to read about. You're going to enjoy it. So let me share my screen with you. You can read along with me, but you might want to take some time to read this even on your own because it's pretty amazing. Okay, so verse 17, and we're picking up where Paul was in Ephesus and he's um, causing a stir among the philosophers for sure. And we're going to see more of that tonight. But I do want to say one of the things that's helpful as we read this is sometimes we read it from our perspective, and we live in a world that is postmodern. So we have more of a rational science approach to life, prove and measure, and things make sense, even though they don't always make sense. But for the most part, life makes sense. Um, Whereas the mindset here is people were very into um, lots of different gods, superstition, the supernatural. That's their mindset. And we're going to see a lot of that tonight. And it is something that I think we in the Christian world need to be awakened to, that there is a supernatural realm. There are demonic forces. As Paul would put it, there are principalities and powers that we are warring against. And the way that we do that is by submission to the one who is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, who has the ultimate authority, the ultimate power, and to follow his instruction. And you're going to see how Paul does that here. So, verse 17, all of the people in Ephesus were awestruck, both Jews and non-Jews. When they heard about what happened, great fear fell over the entire city, and the authority of the name of Jesus was exalted. Many believers publicly confessed their sins and disclosed their secrets. Large numbers of those who had been practicing magic took all of their books and scrolls of spells and incantations and publicly burned them. So think of that. Like, this is incredible. Like, Paul's message impacted these people so much that they took these books that were incredibly valuable to them. In fact, the next line tells us when the value of all the books and scrolls was calculated, it came to several million dollars. I don't know how they calculated that, but it says here 50,000 drachmas. So anyway, long and the short, it was very it cost them a lot to throw this out and burn it. And but it shows you the power of God, which we pick up in verse 20. The power of God caused the word to spread, and the people were greatly impacted. And that's an important verse to sit on, because I think we create momentum by being obedient to God. And I'm not saying that there isn't some level of momentum that gets created as we align ourselves with God. Of course it does. But ultimately, the power of God is moving, and we get to participate in what He's already doing. That's where the power of our agreement comes in, is the flow of His grace, the flow of His kingdom is operating. And as we align ourselves with that flow, it releases to see God move in even greater ways because we're agreeing with heaven. And that's what we're seeing happening here. The power of God is what caused the word to spread. And that's what we need. That's why prayer is so important. That's why taking time to get the perspective of heaven is so important, because we step into that flow of grace, and the power of God is what causes the word to spread. So we need that in our nation, in our state, in our county, and across the world. Okay, verse 21. Paul had it in his heart, gets interesting here, to go to Jerusalem, and on his way there to revisit the places in Greece where he had ministered. After that, he said, I have to go to Rome also. So he sent ahead into Macedonia two of his ministry assistants, Timothy and Erastus, while he remained in Western Turkey. At that time, a major disturbance erupted in Ephesus over the people following God's way. So, first part of the story that we read, people throwing away their sorcery books, it causes a major uproar. It began, verse 24, with a wealthy man named Demetrius who had built a large business and enriched many craftsmen by manufacturing silver shrines for the Greek goddess Artemis. So here's where finance comes in, right? They had built an industry that revolved around worshiping Artemis. And now, because Paul is coming and preaching the truth and he's overturning the way they think, it's going to affect the economy. Demetrius called a meeting of his employees along with all the various tradespeople of Ephesus and said, "You know that our prosperous livelihood is being threatened by this Paul, who is persuading crowds of people to turn away from our gods. We make a good living by doing what we do, but everywhere Paul goes, not only here in Ephesus, but throughout Western Turkey, he convinces people that there's no such thing as a God made with hands. Our businesses are in danger of being discredited. Not only that, but the temple of our great goddess Artemis is being dishonored and seen as worthless. She is the goddess of all Western Turkey and is worshipped in all the world. But if this outrage continues, everyone everywhere will suffer the loss of her magnificent greatness." I would argue that if she had magnificent greatness, then Paul's message wouldn't be effective at all. What he was showing is God's magnificent greatness to the point where he was driving Artemis worship out of the equation, and it was causing them to lose money, to lose status, and that's why they hated it. So there you go. I think we can see some of that happening in the world that we live in today as well. Verse 28. When the people heard this, they were filled with boiling rage. They shouted over and over Artemis, the great goddess of the Ephesians. The entire city was thrown into chaos as everyone rushed into the stadium together, dragging with them Gaius and Aristarchus, Paul's traveling companions from Macedonia. So now they're pulling in people who had ministered with Paul. When Paul attempted to go in and speak to the massive crowd, the disciples wouldn't let him. So the disciples of Artemis wouldn't let him. Oh, I'm sorry. No, actually, these are the true disciples telling him not to go because they did not want him to um, get into trouble with the government officials. Verse 31, some of the high-ranking government officials of the region, because they loved him. So it was disciples that were following the way, sent Paul an urgent message saying, "Whatever you do, don't step foot into the stadium." The frenzied crowd shouted out one thing and others shouted something else until they were all in mass confusion, with many not even knowing what they were, why they were there. Isn't that crazy? Verse 33, some of the Jews pushed forward a Jewish man named Alexander to be their spokesman, and different factions of the crowd shouted instructions at him. He stood before the people and motioned for everyone to be quiet so he could be heard. But when he began to speak, they realized that he was a Jew, so they shouted him down. For nearly 2 hours, they shouted over and over, "Great is Artemis, the goddess of the Ephesians." Eventually, the mayor of the city was able to quiet them down. He said, "Fellow citizens, who in the world doesn't know that we are devoted to the great temple of Artemis and to her image that fell from Zeus out of heaven? Since no one can deny it, you should all just be quiet. Calm down and don't do anything hasty. For you have brought these men before us who aren't guilty of any crime. They are neither temple robbers nor blasphemers of our goddesses or of our goddess." Verse 38. So if Demetrius and the men of his trade have a case against someone, the courts are open. They can appear before the judge and press charges. But if you're looking for anything further to bring up, it must be argued before the court and settled there and not here. So he's calming the situation down and he's saying if you have a case against these men, then it needs to be done in a proper way. It needs to be done actually in a court where you can prove the charges against them. And instead of inciting a riot, which you're going to see more of here as we finish the chapter. Don't you realize we're putting our city in danger of being accused of a riot by the Roman authorities? So they were afraid of the Roman authorities. They didn't want them to intervene because they knew that wasn't good news. There is no good explanation we can give them for all of this commotion. After he said this, he dispersed the crowds and sent them away. So you see lots of things at play here, right? Like you see the power of God impacting people, it threatening their already established belief systems. And because of that, they react in anger, they react in fear, they react in control. And it's requiring, I see God even at work in the people who stood up to disperse the riot, so that it didn't create a situation that is more escalating. Um, but God is just operating throughout these missionary journeys, and you're just seeing incredible things. I mean, just the first part of this chapter where they were throwing away their sorcery books and turning to Jesus, that should give us hope for what's possible. So when we look at what we're facing in our world, there's lots of people worshiping Artemis in different ways. And it could be all kinds of different altars that we see being, worshipped in all different forms. Money, we could go on down the line. That I don't need to even go there. You know them before I even say them. But God is more powerful, and what we see is God moving on the hearts of men and women and doing what he's going to do. The power of God caused his word to spread. That's what we should be praying. That's what we should be agreeing with, to see the places that we live become under the influence of the kingdom that lives inside of us. So be encouraged as we read this, because if God can do it for them, he can do it for us. And even more so, because now there's even more believers than existed back then. So there you go. Be encouraged. Pray. Use your words. Agree with heaven. And let's just see what happens as we begin to pray together and watch what God can do. All right, have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you again for Acts chapter 20.
Be lifted high, be lifted high.